Take 5. Hello, welcome, or welcome back to TSC Talks, the podcast inspired by the condition known as tuberous sclerosis complex. My name is Jill Woodworth, and I'm your host. Thank you for tuning in. Again, we are on the Medical Cannabis podcast series. I hope you enjoyed Jana Champagne, cannabis nurse, talking about her work with cannabis for autism. Very inspiring. There's much more in the podcast than just that. That's what I'm pulling out. And moving on to this podcast, my guest is Russell Cole. Russell talked to me while he was starting out getting his haircut, so there's a little background noise. I appreciate him taking the time out from his busy life. He was in Europe, and part of the interview was conducted while he was getting his haircut, and then he was walking on the street and perfectly clear. Well, Lisa might not think so. She did some editing on it, but really excellent, eloquent speaker and able to explain to me the technology in language that I can understand. So what he does with organic grow solutions, proprietary imaging technology to help the cannabis and big agricultural industries benefit from big data. So breaking that down a little bit for anybody that's like me and kind of a new at this. He takes a look at the biophysiology of the crops through imaging solutions using light waves, advanced imaging lenses to look at the light signatures that plants give off. It's really interesting. Sometimes that signature indicates a plant has low nutrients or possibly a disease that's starting to break out. They take that information and build data libraries. They work with any client, corporate producers, any size, indoor, outdoor, greenhouse, and they deploy drones with cameras to take these pictures. So they're, cutting down on costs to go out there physically and check on all these plants. The technology is saving money and giving much more precise information to the growers. Thought that was fascinating. And we also continue on. He indulges me in a conversation on the cannabis industry in a broader sense, talking about the differences between Europe and North America and thoughts on that, his personal views on CBD, and also, just talking about the endocannabinoid system that we have for a reason, woven into our DNA. It's good for us as a species, and we are I get this from everyone, and obviously we are at the tip of the iceberg learning about all the properties of this plant. So we kind of go over a lot in here. I hope you enjoy it. I found it fascinating, and I'm not going to keep talking. I'm not sure who's going to be up next. I got 5 or 6 that are already edited, and I just have to put them together. So we're going to be popping those out, more guests on the way, as well as more general special ed or special needs TSC Talks guest as well. So keep tuning in. Thanks so much for your patience with my muttering through this intro. And thanks, Russell, for being on the podcast. Take it away.
Thanks for doing this. Really appreciate it. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how, you ended up in your current role. You started Organic Grow Solutions. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So just go ahead and give me a little bit of
Organic Grow Solutions started because my brother-in-law introduced me to the cannabis industry. He's a journalist and somebody who really just was very passionate about the industry and wrote globally about the industry and knew a lot of people and always encouraged me to, start my own company. And because he introduced me to a few very important people within the industry, I fortunately was able to build a business. And it started off in soil and amendments and understanding, the actual cultivation side of the industry. And now I've taken my interests to the big data aggregation, medicinal patient side of the industry. So it's almost connecting the soil to the patient and everything in between. And that's really how it's developed and where my passion is today.
So you're from Canada, is that correct?
Yeah, Toronto, Canada.
So that's really fascinating. Tell me about what you do right now in your current Organic Grow Solutions. Tell me about it.
And that's a great question. We're currently actually still focusing on the soil and building out an amendment line for soil.
Tell me what that means. I'm completely ignorant.
No problem. Yeah.
Educate me.
So you have a soil, usually an inert media, something that doesn't have light, and a lot of cultivators are currently cultivating indoor with synthetic nutrients, and they don't have a whole lot of organic material, if any at all. So a lot of these companies are really just producing what I would call synthetic nutrient cannabis, and that's a traditional method of growing at scale. But what we're focused on is bringing some more microbiological matter and good bacteria to the cultivation process. And we're finding really unique, rare amendments to do that with. But ultimately, that's just one small part of our business. And the real focus of our business today is to work with cultivators on advanced imaging. So really taking a look at the biophysiology of the crops through imaging solutions and having the opportunity, and having the opportunity to see what's really going on at the crop level based on, wavelengths of light that we can't see with the human eye, but these cameras can.
Oh man, that's so interesting. So you're taking plants and you're putting them into some kind of a setting where you're analyzing them with this technology.
Yeah, and we initially started doing that work because we wanted to validate our soil amendment products, and we realized very quickly that it was a valuable solution for actual cultivation, because what we do is we just take photos using these very advanced imaging lenses, and we start to look at the different types of light signatures that the plants give off. And sometimes that signature indicates that a plant has low nutrient levels, or maybe possibly a disease, or a pest pressure zone that's starting to break out. And we're able to really start to take that information and build data libraries to further understand and get more precise as we continue to build our data library.
Okay. I'm trying to take this all in. So who hires you to do this work?
And that's a great question. We work with any client, any size, indoor, outdoor, or greenhouse, as long as they're actually a corporate producer and not a home grower. Ultimately, there is a strong product that we can put in the marketplace once we acquire enough data. But really, you need a lot of data. So there's really, unless you have a crowdsourced type of home grower network, which takes a lot of effort and it's expensive to acquire the hardware, you really need to focus on the larger scale organizations to collect data from, because they have thousands of plants.
Okay.
And we really just deploy our cameras via drone. So we fly them around. Yeah. We fly them around outdoor, and then we have a rail system that we build custom for every operation indoor. And it basically allows the cameras to float on rails and hover over the crops. And fortunately, something that's very unique to what we do is that we use LiDAR technology as well, which you'll find in self-driving cars. And the LiDAR technology, it really allows us to advance what we see, because LiDAR penetrates through semi-permeable membranes. So you can actually penetrate through the canopy of the crop, and you can see down further along, below the canopy, closer to the soil, to start determining everything, like from the soil all the way to the top of the plant.
So can you tell from that? Well, obviously you're looking at the health of the plant and other variables, but can you tell the components, like the different, how much THC, the CBD, from that kind of analysis? That's probably a silly question, but.
Well, no, it's a great question. The sky is the limit, to be honest, with the technology. So as long as you collect enough data and develop the proper algorithms to support the data, you can determine quite a number of things. And the basic use cases are really just to see if a plant has a disease or if it has low nutrient levels. But in the future, and as we collect data, we're going to be able to tell if the plant is developing into a male plant versus a female plant. So like you were saying, the THC and CBD levels are one component that we will eventually look into. But for now, we're actually looking at terpene profiles and other characteristics of the crop when it comes to, expression of the crop. And we can actually take this into a breeding program and help breeders understand, which profiles they're looking for are most sustainably capable of reproducing themselves. And then ultimately, again, with enough data, you can really understand quite a bit about the plant. Ultimately, the solution today helps reduce labor When it comes to actually physically going to the plant and looking at the plant, you can do a lot more with just the technology and the hardware. And then reducing the labor to physically look at the plant is one thing. The next part of the solution that's very helpful is just ultimately maximizing the operation to optimize your nutrients, to ensure that your crops are stable and risk free of disease. And that's really what we're aiming to build today.
Now, how long do you send your setup out to a location to collect the data when you're hired to do this?
We generally work with our clients one-on-one for the first month. And what we do is we set everything up in that month. We start to do some preliminary tests with the technology as it's being set up. And then what we do is we build an analysis program where we take the data, we collect the data once a week, and then we provide a report once a week to the cultivator. And that's so that they can actually see on a weekly basis how their crop is developing. But in the future, what we plan to do is have a more real-time solution where we can have, data being collected every few hours and a whole web-based platform for the cultivator to sign into and have alerts and be able to understand their crop. We call it active monitoring versus passive monitoring, where you usually see passive monitoring is just, taking environmental control data, which is, temperature, humidity, other things like that. And you look at that later. But what we're doing is we're looking at the active components of the cultivation operation.
That is really, really interesting. I had no idea that there was anything like that out there. How is business going with this?
It's excellent. I think everyone I speak to is highly interested in the solution. It's just a matter of actually getting into cultivation operations. Today in North America, we find that operations are fairly inundated with cultivating and just producing and getting their product into the marketplace because, investment dollars have come in and there needs to be a return on the investment. And they're not really looking at technology as seriously as I would, have liked when we first came up with the idea, to be very transparent. But in Europe, actually, where I am today, and any outdoor cultivation operation, to be honest, is really where we're finding a niche. And that's because there's so many costs associated with outdoor cultivation when it comes to labor, and being able to fly a drone over 100 acres in 20 minutes to gather a lot of data that can help make decisions and support your strategy moving forward is super valuable. So what we're doing is we're really just working with one cultivator right now in Italy, and they are reducing their team from about 10 people to 2 when it comes to looking at their field on a personal basis and helping them, just reduce the time it takes to find problems. Again, as we build the data set and the data library, we'll have a much more, I'd say, fully rounded solution that can offer more value to them. But initially, we're really just looking at water pooling, nutrient levels, and pest pressure zones, as well as disease pressure zones. So it's very high level stuff today, but we're able to guide cultivators to say, this is an area of your cultivation that needs more attention. Go take a clipping of a plant, go send it to the lab. You'll likely be able to find that there may be an issue there that you wouldn't have otherwise known about.
Okay, so then how do pesticides and other, heavy metals, how does that play into, like, would a grower decide, okay, well, this plant is, you gave me this advice, how am I going to fix this? Now, would that be a place where,
well, that's another really good component of the industry to talk about, which is, heavy metals, pesticides, lab testing, making sure that product passes regulation. And fortunately, the technology, again, like I said, the sky is the limit.
Right. I know you're just at the beginning with this technology.
But we can build use cases to determine high levels of specific types of chemicals or types of pathogens, or even lead and etc. There are ways that over time we'll be building these signatures to see what's happening, and our goal is to reduce costs for cultivators to have to, obviously you lose a crop if you don't comply with the regulations and you have to destroy your whole crop. Our technology can actually help you see in advance what types of levels of those areas are present and can help you avoid having those levels kind of increase to an unstable point. I don't know what the right way to say that would be, but to a dangerous level, I would say.
So kind of like pre-gaming, like they could look ahead of time, like this could happen if I don't take action now.
Yeah, it will definitely show in advance everything. Yeah.
No, that's really that. I can see how that would be very, very useful. So, as far as the industry, just segue, kind of sidestepping a little bit. What is the problem with? How big is the problem with pesticides and chemicals that are being used to preserve or somehow, I don't know, get the most money out of it? Is kind of how I think the role of pollutants comes into the...
Yeah, the biggest shock to me personally when I first started in the industry was there was this concept at indoor cultivation facilities that was called flushing, right? So there's a flush cycle at the end of every cultivation where for a number of days, the cultivator will actually drain and pass water through their crops, just straight water. And the reason they do that is to lower the levels of pesticides and other types of arsenic, other types of chemicals that they use in the process that would cause the crops to not comply with regulations. So ultimately, when I found that out, I was very disappointed and almost taken back because, this is a medicine that we're consuming, and you can't really feel good about a medicine you're consuming if, you realize it needs to be flushed of, like, this is not a tomato you can take home and wash. This is cannabis that you will ultimately, either consume via cooking or smoking, combusting. And I think that is inherently different than food. So it concerned me quite a bit. I was really shocked. And I saw a lot of cultivators more in Canada than other places I've been actually go through this synthetic chemical regimen to produce their crops. And by all means, it does help avoid a lot of problems and reduce risks for operating and growing cannabis. But personally, it's not something that I would ascribe to. It's not something I truly feel comfortable with when I want to consume any type of medicine. My preference would be to have it be grown in a way that was not requiring that flush cycle, if you will.
When you say organic certifications for cannabis, what does that mean?
That's a whole conversation in itself. So as a business owner, I'll give you the high level. And the reason I'll speak from my own education, my company had to organic certify our products. We're working with a very large cultivator, a tier 1 cultivator in the world. They're millions of square feet large. And basically what we had to do was certify our products organic because they wanted us to help them in their organic operation. So I went through the entire process internally to certify my products organic. And I can tell you there are flaws in the organic processing.
What is the requirements for getting something certified organic?
Well, there are several different third-party accredited agencies that you have to apply to and submit documents to. And those documents really just get reviewed to make sure that your products and your processes do not use any type of chemicals or any adulterated or modified, biological elements, so that you can keep your products as natural as possible. So, even changing a small chemical compound just manually would disallow your product from being, organic or not. And so what we're doing is working with a couple of different accredited institutions to certify our products. But then they have a whole rule book for cultivation operations and farms as well. And this is not just cannabis. This is, all agriculture. There is an organic certifiable designation you can acquire. And again, to do that, you can't be unnatural. It has to be as natural as possible. But I still find there are flaws in the organic system as well. So nothing's perfect.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of leads me to the next question. And now that Wall Street's flooding the industry with money, how is that going to change the way that American cannabis works? And your thoughts on kind of whole plant cannabis as opposed to isolates?
Yeah, well, Wall Street flooding the market with dollars. I would love to see where the dollars go and what happens. And I think we've seen an expansion and a contraction in the industry. I have, at least personally, in North America, where And to be honest, the more interesting market to me today is the European market. That's why I'm in Europe now, because it's a much different approach. I would say this economy here and the perspective and just way of doing business in Europe is much different than North America. So when it comes to Wall Street, I would say the quick answer is it's expanded. So it kind of blew up and then contracted in Canada. And that's really the strongest survive kind of mentality. And that's where we're at today in Canada. In the States, I think you're seeing the same thing, but the States is a much more volatile economy because the rules are changing so quickly, and you're not homogenized today. You're very separated. Like Oregon went through a very big problem with having so much production and not enough people to sell it to because they couldn't distribute their product outside of state boundaries. And same with Colorado, they felt the same pain. And so I think once America federalizes their cannabis program, marijuana program, hemp program, I think that we're going to see an incredibly different landscape. Yeah. And today, again, there's just been a lot of expansion and contraction, but I think there will be more expansion in the States to come once it federally legalizes, and who knows when that will happen.
Right.
But the difference, so then you asked about whole plant medicine and isolate. So my stance or opinion, I don't really have a stance on whole plant versus isolated. I think that there's a lot of work being done on both sides. I think when I speak to people in the marketplace, it's more or less commonly understood that whole plant medicine will add value to humanity, whereas isolated based medicine and taking terpenes from potentially other, let's just say, synthetic sources and combining those terpenes with isolated cannabinoids to create an entourage effect and have different things that are synthetically produced may or may not be as effective. And I have no real stance on it because I just think nobody's done enough research yet. I think Israel is leading the way there. And I think that, there are some very strong players in the industry that are doing really significant research. And I'm not one of them, but I believe it's going to take a lot of time. Some companies have hung their hats on one, direction over another. And that's fair and fine. And I think there's going to be a lot of validation on both sides for the next while. And, we just went through a vape pen scare where, we're going to find out, things are great. And then 6 months later, we're going to say, or a year and a half later, or 5 years later, we're going to say, we really screwed that one up. Right. Right. I mean, this is the way humans work. We want to try to do our best. And then when you include profitable business and profiteering, it makes things a bit more complicated. But yeah, there's going to be arguments on both sides for a while. I'm excited to see the proof in the pudding when it comes to isolated cannabinoids and creating other compounds with other terpenes, and then even when the pharmaceutical industry gets involved to further compound those cannabinoids and terpenes with other types of medications and see how that affects the type of medicine that gets put into the market. So back to the Europe conversation, I think that the biggest difference between Europe and North America, Canada and America together combined, is Europe is much more apprehensive to enter the cannabis space on the recreational adult use side. So they do have, recreational adult use in Holland, but they really you don't see a whole lot of it throughout the rest of Europe. And I mean, a lot of European countries are decriminalizing several drugs, like Portugal has decriminalized several drugs, but they're really still not condoning adult use, and it's not legal. They're really focusing on medicinal use, and they're doing it very, I would say, methodically, and they're fortunately able to take the best practices from Canada, from other countries that they've seen, to develop their policy and regulations behind the medicinal side. And so what that's doing is it's stopping the hype from creating, a brand sort of propaganda, if you will, to they're just focusing on the validation of it being a medicine today and really working the system to include pharmacies and studies and, research. And all I do is speak to cultivators in Europe who, almost scoff at the adult use recreational market as a starting point for them to get into the industry because, they know that if you're not the best and the highest grade medical product on the marketplace, you're not going to succeed, because eventually all those best, highest grade medicinal products, they will have recreational and adult use brands, which will be trusted. But in North America, I think a lot of companies did it the reverse.
Yes.
And we're going to see what that leads to eventually. I mean, there's many types of cannabis consumers. So some of them are always just going to say, well, cannabis is cannabis. But I mean, that's fine. But I'm really appreciative of the European approach.
The more I'm learning about it, the more I see the value in that. Now, living in Massachusetts went medical for several years before going rec. And our testing is probably the best in the country, is what I've been told. So, in a smaller version, I think that it just kind of gives cannabis users a bad name, because going rec first, it's kind of just putting it into the same category with, more of a fun type thing to do, not necessarily a serious medicine. And it's hard to get around that once it's already out there, especially in the medical community. I've noticed a lot of resistance to it, and I can see why, because there's just a lot of unknowns, and doctors have a liability, but it's getting to the point where it's a luxury to remain ignorant about the medical aspect of it.
Well, yeah, of course. When you see the benefits, and we're only at the tip of the iceberg. So, I've been told by very senior people in the industry just, what they've seen firsthand and what kind of research they're doing, and how, they look at a petri dish and cancer cells are being destroyed by specific combinations of cannabinoids. And that's exciting. But again, is it replicable? Is it safe? I'm not a researcher in that space, so I can't answer those questions. Sure. But it's fascinating to see the depths that we think, this plant can really take. And that's what it's about. So to me, it's also not just about the medicine and consuming cannabis. It's about how to use cannabis in a variety of ways to really impact the world, beyond just cannabinoid material and terpenes and trichome. It's, what can we do to reduce acrylics and chemicals in construction and other forms of, other places in the world where we're really wasteful. And I think we're really lucky that this is becoming a plant that we can use for a variety of purposes, and now it's being produced at such a large scale that we can really support a transition towards more sustainable products, which I totally support.
Yeah, so I guess I forgot about that piece of like the whole hemp industry, where we'll be able to have an environmental impact in the long run if we're able to transition to products like you were saying. Yeah, that's great. For CBD, now I know you're coming at it from kind of a more data and grower background. What are your thoughts on people buying? The CBD market is just in the US is just nuts. I mean, you can get it anywhere, and people are really not that knowledgeable about it. It interacts with other medications, and there's a lot of inconsistency with labels and what's actually in the product across the spectrum of CBD market. So do you have any experience with that or thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a two-part question. First is just when it comes to labels and being accurate, that's something we have zero control over. I think we have to really rely on the regulators, and unfortunately things aren't always going to be perfect. But what I can say is that people should be doing their best, and I think California's done a good job at cracking down quite significantly. Okay. There was a date last year, I forget the date, where they literally said, we're going to be taking product off the shelves, and if you don't comply, it's gone. So that actually happened, and I think that sent a message to the rest of the community. And fortunately for the companies that did comply, they were, still on the shelf. So that answers maybe the first part of the question, which is it's disappointing. My opinion would be, like anybody's, I hope, that it's disappointing if a company is labeling a product as one thing and it's not. Again, I don't have much control over that.
No.
The other part of your question was just how the CBD craze and how it's really being taken on, and almost blindly taken on, I think, by a significant number of people, which is fair. I think, we're all looking for, I don't want to say the magic drug or the cure for everything, but people might be, but I have a story about that in a second. But ultimately, I'm not a doctor, but my doctor and my best friend is a doctor, and his approach, and what I often hear is just, every patient is an individual patient, and everybody has different tolerances and feelings about the drugs they take and how they react to them personally. And as long as you feel better and like you're improving in health, then continue doing what you're doing. And if you don't, then, take control of your situation and make sure that you continue to do your best for yourself. And so if somebody's taking CBD and it's helping them sleep, and, they sleep better for 6 months, but then all of a sudden they stop sleeping as well. I mean, continue to go out there and look for other things to help yourself. So I don't know. And maybe there's a lot more to it, but ultimately I try to keep it simple. If something works, do it. Yeah.
Right. If it's helping you, and you've made sure it's not affecting any other medications you're on, then go for it.
And this whole idea that cannabis has really been around as long as humans have been around, and then the plant has generally followed our own, travels throughout the world in our existence. So, it's not, I firmly believe that this plant is not a dangerous plant to our health. I think if you consume anything at a high volume, whether it's water or an orange tree, if you have too many oranges, you'll get sick. So, people can get sick from anything, including cannabis. And I think that in moderation, it's just as good as potentially an orange or water or other things. I mean, we have an endocannabinoid system for a reason,
Right. Been woven into our DNA somehow.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's, again, the tip of the iceberg, but I'm firmly positioned in the belief that it's part of our nature. It's part of our existence. In moderation, it's probably very good for us as a species. And I really do think that there's going to be a lot of validation to come. Do I think it kind of got put into the marketplace and blown up really quickly? Yeah. And is that disappointing? No. I think there's always going to be bumps in learning in any type of, new project, but that's my thought there.
Thank you. Yeah. You said you had a story. What was the story?
Oh, yeah. So I was just in Rome. It might have been yesterday. And I was in a cannabis shop and just doing some research and getting to know the owners. And they didn't speak English very well, the owners of the shop, but they had a couple of customers come in from England. And when I was in there, I just volunteered myself to talk to their clients and, kind of help them out. And one woman came in and it was her first day of her trip. She was with her friend. They were in their probably 40s. And one of them had a bummed knee. And she, it was their first day. So she really wasn't optimistic about the rest of her trip. But, I chatted with her for a couple of minutes. Fortunately, I knew the shop well enough. By that point, I saw their production, like in videos, and I looked at their lab test results, and they were really, impressing me with how they cultivate and what they do. So I really believed in the product, and she, was looking for a cure to her problems. And it represents, like I was just saying, that there are people out there that are just looking for a magical bullet.
Holy grail.
But at the same time, as I spoke to her, I said, hey, like, this may or may not work for you. You're going to spend €100, call it $100 American dollars on a potential fix here. Don't get your hopes too high, because it just might not work. It might not do anything that you're looking for it to do. But by all means, if it does, you're going to be really, far ahead for your $100. And then beyond that, I think it's good to set your expectations low, because ultimately there is such thing that, like, the placebo effect is very real.
Oh,
right?
Yes.
It's like very real. So whether it's really doing something for her or not physically, mentally, if it does her any help, then it's worth $100. So I mean, that was the discussion I had with her. Whether it helps her physically or not, she left very happy. You could tell that there was something, more elevated in her mood and her energy. And it's because of this opportunity to maybe improve. And I think, again, if we understand that there's a maybe improve caveat, then I think we're all going to be really positively receptive to our experiences with cannabis, because I think anybody who goes into it thinking you're just going to automatically have some life-altering, amazing, experience, you might be very disappointed. So, it's about your attitude. I think the industry and the product, you need the right attitude.
Absolutely. I think there is a learning curve.
the real mantra, I think, on the medical side is, start low, go slow. And I think that is by far the most important thing to do. And even if you're not having an actual physical or mental change in any of your feelings because of the plant and your consumption of the plant, that doesn't mean it's not going to help, right? And I think that that's where patients or any user, kind of myself included, because I'm a very reserved person when it comes to drug use. It's just, even pharmaceuticals, I avoid them. And it's because I have a very sensitive tolerance to anything I put in my body. So I find that with cannabis specifically, as a kid, I smoked cannabis and I got super high and it wasn't fun. It's almost like the same stories you hear about with people drinking tequila as a younger person, that you just kind of got into your parents' tequila cabinet or liquor cabinet and you hate tequila. But, when you're 30 years old or later in your life, you find out that tequila is actually a fantastic beverage that is, a beautiful experience, or it could be for people, as long as you drink it responsibly and moderately and enjoy it. So I think, again, with cannabis, you really need to start low, go slow. If it doesn't have an actual conscious effect, then that's okay. And you can continue to just really, really minimally increase your dosage. And then depending on really why you're taking it, sometimes you don't even need a psychoactive effect and response, right? Sometimes you just take it because it's part of your natural regimen, and it'll help with inflammation. It'll help with other things where you don't need your head to feel high. I think that's a big misconception too.
Yes, definitely. You don't need to be blasted in order for it to be effective.
No. So, we are our own test subjects, and I think that's really interesting.
Yes, that's
I think,
huge.
Yeah, we can have a whole another conversation on another company that I'm a part of, which is part of the medical side.
Really?
Like I mentioned at the beginning of the chat. Yeah, where we're taking medical data from patient experiences and we're looking at, what types of patient care treatment plans doctors are developing in Canada that include cannabis, and to understand, how those treatment plans can affect patients. And personally, I'm patient number one for this one company. I'm about to have a procedure on my kidneys, which I'm going to end up, being in quite a bit of pain afterwards. And there's a treatment plan that we're putting together. My doctor's is including cannabinoid-based therapy, and it's going to be, I think, a learning experience. But I will be the actual test subject, and we'll continue to gather information and put it into our data aggregation platform and continue to learn and continue to analyze. And there's so much learning to do.
Yeah, this has been really helpful. I appreciate it. Do you want to give me your own vision as far as for the industry and you personally?
My life vision, honestly, and this is very relatable, to cannabis. It's taking technologies, call it cannabis, call it anything, biosynthetic, 3D printed organs in the future, and other technologies that I think are very valuable to society, but there are barriers to accessing those technologies, and we've seen that with cannabis, whether it's because of government regulations and prohibition, or whether it's because of cost, or whether it's because of data, everything. I think that bringing access to the things that humanity could really value from is a mission I'm on, and whether, again, that's cannabis or a biosynthetic printed, 3D printed organ, I think it's very important to commercialize and accelerate and lobby and push the boundaries.
Yep.
And that's mostly my thought, is just giving access to people and accelerating our development towards making sure that our world can actually, just improve.
Yep, bringing everybody along. I love it. Thank you so much, Russell. Great to meet you.
Appreciate your time, and I really thank you for having me.
Loved it. Take care.